Admiral, great to see you. Thank you for hosting us today, and congratulations on your promotion since the last time I saw you. In having spoken to several of your predecessors, the focus for a long time has been on the size of the fleet and the trajectory that the size of the fleet is on. I've noted in your confirmation hearing, in your communications with the fleet since becoming CNO, that you've focused on a different idea. You're focusing on what you've called the ideal Navy. What's the composition and what's the capability, in your view, of the ideal Navy, Admiral?
Well, Francis, first, thank you for this interview and thanks for taking the time. And there's a lot of studies out there. Some of this is even legislated on how big the Navy will be. You can see numbers like 355 ships, 381 ships. But our build rate and our decommissioning rate has been pretty much equal for quite a while. So the Navy is held at about 300 or so ships for a long time. So I don't see that fundamentally changing in my time. So instead of focusing on that absolute number, I do think it's important to focus on what the Navy needs to be able to do. And our adversaries get a vote on that. Our combatant commanders, to meet the risk that they are incurring, get a vote on that. And so the Navy I want to field is one that can meet those demands globally, to protect our sea lines of communication, our commerce, the choke points of the world, to be ready to execute prompt and sustained combat operations in our most stressing operational plans. But at the end of the day is one that is not only ready, but sustainable and has the right mix of high-end combat ships, high-end aircraft, and of course, unmanned autonomous vehicles that actually can deliver the actual lethality required to win. And so to me, much more important than giving some number is the readiness of that Navy, my ability to integrate into the joint force, my ability to integrate with allies and partners in an effective way, and to sustain that through the actual readiness that the Navy needs to be effective globally, sir. What's the delta between the Navy that you have today and the vision that you just outlined? Well, I think the delta really turns into the priorities that I've set. And those priorities are with the foundry and the fleet and then the way we fight. And the foundry comprised of all the infrastructure, the material and the people, the total force. And that means all the sailors, our civilians, and our contractors, and the folks that are supporting me have to be right. The infrastructure is part of that as well. And of course, the material, the supply parts and things necessary that I consume and that I need to actually sustain that Navy form the fundamental delta. And the emphasis that I'm putting on that, as you've seen with the products I put out, first and foremost, and I think it's in keeping with all Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies, is they put their people first. At the center of all my problem sets, the thing that matters to me most are our sailors. And I've recognized in my time and as a flag officer and throughout my career that by emphasizing the people, then that ends up being the actual thing that helps all other lines of effort. So I am unapologetically making sure sailors are first in my campaign. Sailors First is the title of C-Note number 1, the first message that you sent to the fleet. And I read item number 3, I've directed your Navy leadership to take the steps necessary to ensure that, all capital letters, no sailor will live afloat. Why is that important, and why is that near the top of your list of priorities? Well, I've always found that, sailors report to a ship. They spend at least 50% of that first assignment on a ship. And the last thing I want them to do when it comes back to port is not be able to leave the ship and have a home. I think it's an antiquated idea. So I'd like for people to live and work in different places. I think of myself as a young 18-year-old in college. If I was on a ship, I want to have a relationship with, a girlfriend. I want to be able to have somewhere I can sit and talk with my friends. So I think that needs to be separate from the ship. And just structurally, since the beginning of our Navy, and this is really lands predominantly with our surface Navy, our aviation community and our submarine community and our information warfare community. No one else lives on board the platform. in which they work every day. So this is a young surface sailor problem, is I think they deserve to have that separated. Imagine an 8-9 month deployment on board a ship, and you get back to Norfolk or San Diego, and you know that your home is still on that ship. It's just not right. And so we are working hard to get all sailors a place to live and putting a lot of emphasis on the quality of those places as well. About 7,000 or so remain. We've moved off about 2,500, and that's been some great help from Congress, who has given me some expanded authorities to give BAH, or Basic Allowance for Housing, to E4s and E3s or whoever needs that. So as I bring sailors off the ship and put them into housing, I can move more sailors into the communities. And doing that is not as easy as I thought it would be, but the team working that is getting after it, and I'm not going to stop till that number is 0.
Do you, what will you need to do, and what will your team need to do resource-wise to be able to accomplish that goal?
In certain areas, we have the housing to do that. So it's going to happen quick. In certain places, and that can be overseas, and some of our forward deployed naval forces, think Japan and perhaps Rhoda, and some of the places like that, the ability to move ashore is not quite as easy, but I'm getting after it, and so it's not equal. But I want every sailor that's listening to this today to know that I'm going to eventually get you off that ship, and we're going to get great quality housing for you to live in. And if you need to live in the community, we're going to make sure your BAH supports that.
Back to C note number 1, and I'm just going to pull a couple of things out of here, but there's a theme that I detect. Galley facilities, uniforms and sea bag, free Wi-Fi, the nav admin process. All of those things don't sound really high profile, and they don't sound like tip of the spear things. Why do they make it into C note number 1, the first message that you send out to the fleet?
Because if you think of everything through the view of, I guess, a kill chain, if you will, at the beginning of that kill chain, really, and every step throughout, its focus is on people in my mind. So I wanted to, Sailor First, be the first C note that I put out to let the Navy know that I'm not kidding about this. And these little things that have bugged me as my time as a flag officer, I wanted to come in very quickly and get after. You'll see in that C note, we've done some things to make sure sailors get paid on time. That was a big problem we identified a couple years back. So one of these, just to make sure corrective action's sticky. I want to make sure that we didn't lose anything in the effort to get people paid on time. The ability to actually log into a Wi-Fi signal, to get cell signal, especially in the shipyards. You're sitting in the barracks, and you want to actually, have decent Wi-Fi. I think that's just common philosophy in today's world. I apply a standard that my daughters who went to college, if they're visiting a college and they went into the dorm and they couldn't see a Wi-Fi signal, would that be a college I'd let them stay in? I don't think so. So why would I want sailors to not have the same amenity? At the end of the day, Francis, we're asking sailors to go into harm's way, conduct lethal operations, to actually, be a warrior. And under, Secretary of War's, revive the warrior ethos. And you want to treat them like warriors, then we need to treat them like world-class athletes. So that goes to how we feed them, how we build toughness, how we build resiliency, the kit we give them, the place we live, to make their plane frictionless on getting to work, the tools they need to be successful, improving their competency, and then most of all, hold them accountable and pushing the expectation of authority down to them. And make that part of the ROI of the things I'm doing for them, what they owe me is to execute.
Of all the descriptors that you used there about the force that you want to build, resilience was the word that jumped out at me. What's the delta between the resilience that you see in the force today and the end state that you just described there?
It's something that requires constant attention. The force is on a human being change over time. There's an old saying, the character of war changes, but the nature of it doesn't. The character being the characteristics. It has combat kit. It has, we get underway, we're in harm's way, we're at sea. But the nature of, the actual warfare doesn't really change. And so making sure that sailors understand that nature of warfare, given the input products I have from the way they're being brought up today, the technology environment they're in, how they learn, all those things become the delta set. The courage, the boldness, the ability to adapt, And the desire to serve in something bigger than themselves, that has not changed. I don't see that at all. But some of the characteristics on that, how I get that information to them and build them into a world-class warrior has, I have to stay ahead of that. And that's how we do our training. That's how we build, our facilities. Every single aspect of actually delivering that product, if you will, a world-class warrior, has changed. And without some forethought of that and making sure I'm lead turning those initiatives to stay ahead of that, I won't deliver on that promise.
I imagine those elements that you're talking about there are the standby for what's coming next that you write about at the end of C Note 1. Is that a fair assumption on my part?
That is fair.
What are the kinds of things that the sailor that's watching this can maybe expect to hear in C Note 3 coming at some future point?
Well, what they're going to see is really, in C Note 3 is going to be about the fleet. Okay, so I've given the sailor first. C Note 2 is a lot about the foundry. In that, you saw some things about improving maintenance through our shore intermediate maintenance activities, which become a place where sailors can actually be stationed to get back to them learning their actual trade, to know how to repair ships, which ties to the self-sufficiency at sea. And I look at these SEMAs, if you will, putting one in Norfolk and San Diego, is the ultimate sea school on how to keep ships repaired. So what C Note 3 is going to be about is how I actually kind of get that done. Our fleets are the most decisive instrument of national power. And it is how the Navy fights, through the fleet design. And so how I build a fleet, how I command and control it, and at the end of the day is how I deliver response options for the President, for the Secretary of War. And so how I budget for that, how I POM for that, how I prioritize for that, C Note 3 will address a lot of that process.
Last time we talked was when you were still at Fleet Forces Command, and we spoke about the shipbuilding situation that the Navy finds itself in today. What can you do to drive the things that we talked about there to deliver faster, to deliver on better on budget, and so on, deliver these capabilities the way that you would like to as CNO?
Well, as CNO, what I've recognized is, and perhaps unique to my start as CNO, everyone's on the same page here. Everyone recognizes the imperative. Everyone recognizes deficiencies that we have, in particular with shipbuilding, with munitions, stockpiles not being where they should, or parts not being where they should, where gaps at sea have been plagued our operational ability to deliver the combat power, and we've made great strides with record recruiting there. We've already met our recruiting goals for this year already, so that's much improved. But the hardest of those problems land in the industrial base, and it is the defense industrial base, the submarine industrial base, for ship building, new construction, ship repair at the depot level, munitions production. Those are some of our most wicked and challenging problems. Working very closely with the Office of Secretary of War, the Secretary of the Navy, Congress. Everyone's on the same page of the problem. It's just the solution sets and the funding of that, and getting the rudder over to see measurable return on our investments has been a bit still not where I want it to be. I think at the end of that, part of that's process. Part of that is building the workforce that can actually get after that. What I see in some of our new constructions is, I think, unacceptable attrition. I see challenges in recruiting and retention. That's part of building a culture where people want to do this work. You've probably seen some of the ads we're doing where we're campaigning for this. This is a national effort, not just around the local shipyard effort. And so we need to broaden the aperture of the people we bring in. We need to build hooks into the vocational training we do so that we get the right people at these yards to do this very sophisticated vocational craftsmanship work. And then they want to do this for a long time, so build the experience back. And then at the last, Francis, I would tell you to build a palpable sense of urgency. Where there needs to be a desire to be offended if you're one day off critical path, and not be satisfied with being late, and deliver what we're contractually buying and get the ships and capabilities, munitions, and things that I've paid for delivered. And that goes back to your first question, and what I see is the ideal fleet. It's one in which the stuff I've paid for I actually have and I'm operating with.
When you talk about urgency, do you emphasize that because you don't detect enough today, or are you just reinforcing what you already see?
I would say it's a little of both. I don't detect the urgency sense that I see that needs to exist given the environment I think I'm in. The complex geopolitical environments with the threats I face, I don't see the commensurate urgency across every sector of our industrial base. And I think we do need to put more effort there so that the folks that are building the things we need to deliver the combat power we need to actually understand this is no kidding high stakes poker we're playing here, if you will, and they need to be able to deliver on those contracts.
What can you do and what can the department do in the case of a shipbuilding workforce, a submarine building workforce, and so on, where the private sector companies are building those for you? What's the right level of collaboration, intervention, whatever term you might want to use, when it's not really your workforce in that case?
Well, first, I have to take anything that we're culpable for out of the equation. And that could be a way I set requirements, the speed to acquisition, long lead time material, government furnished equipment, testing where the government's involved with that, our oversight. I've got to make sure that our house is clean. I've got to have contracting strategies and contracting vehicles that hold our defense contractors accountable. We've got to have that built so that the milestones are being met, and when they are incentivized to do that. And so I think that's something that needs improvement. I've got to open up the competition space, and that means modularity and spreading out the folks that are helping me build ships across our country, bringing in international partners to build that base. I don't have the workforce to stand up a whole new yard, but there are international partners that do. And so I think we've made some strides there. You know, we've had a very much an American-only approach to this. I think we're in a place now we've got to open up to international partnerships. And I think the administration's amenable to that. I know the Secretary of the Navy is, and I think Congress is as well.
The Coast Guard has bought ships, polar security cutters, because they're short on that platform in their service. Is that something that could potentially be a possibility for the Navy, or is the hardware that you're looking at specialized enough that that's not a potential solution?
No, it is a solution. We have Navy platforms, Navy ships that I need that could apply to. That model could definitely apply. I think our high-end combat ships, you'll see predominantly be American only, but there's no reason that the hull forms and a collaboration with how I install the exquisite combat system couldn't be a partnership going forward.
You mentioned modularity a moment ago, and you talked about modularization and scalability in your confirmation hearings. How does that apply to getting to that ideal Navy that you talked about at the beginning of this discussion?
Well, modules come kind of in two form factors for that definition. Modules can be, the way we build modern ships today is we slice them up into sections. And within the section, the decks that are on there have kit in them within a certain engineering space, a combat space, a bow space. So the kit that goes in that can be through, or the way we actually put the decks in with the actual kit on each one of those floors, if you will, can actually be outsourced. I don't have to do all that at the actual production assembly yard. So you can actually outsource some of that work. We have some companies that are involved doing that for us today. I think that needs to be expanded. Another type of modularity is containerization. So if you can think of putting something in a container, a weapon system, a sensor package, a mission package. You know, we've tried to do this before, and we've tried to build ships that were going to be able to do that and not done well. But I still think it's a sound idea, and I think it is the wave of the future. So think of ships that have multi-mission, and the way I actually go define what it does is through some type of containerized modularity solution set.
You're referring there, I think, to the littoral combat ship system. How do you explain to Congress in particular that this is not, whatever it is that you do in that way, this is not that? Because I don't get a sense that they were satisfied with that program.
They weren't, and I'm not either. And, you know, first of all, that ship in its design was not really what the Navy needed. So going forward, we got to get the ship design right, and it's got to be robust, but it's got to be buildable and executable. You know, I can't have everything become, you know, a Bradley fighting vehicle story for the Navy where I just get a lot of scope creep and we can't actually deliver the ship. So I can't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. So we, snap that chalk line on the ship design, stick with it, and then learn as we deliver those ships on how to actually employ them. I think where we failed on the modularity is I didn't devote enough resources and program management oversight to actually deliver the modules. So that when I go actually cost out the ship and the actual mission kits, I've got to make sure that I hold myself accountable in the actual POM process for delivering on the mission kit. So I don't end up with this Hulk and it not have the actual mission kit. So there's an internal accountability to that, but there's a concept of operation work that needs to be done with combatant commanders and fleet commanders that bear out the reason why they need that mission kit, and then that full circle accountability I think would be there.
You mentioned, we've discussed modulation and scalability. We've talked a lot about human capital and warfighting excellence, 2 of the 3 points that you described to the Armed Services Committee on your confirmation. The third that you mentioned earlier in our discussion and that you listed there is integrated all-domain capability. What would you like to do differently, or what would you like to do more of to integrate yourself more fully into the force?
Well, high-end modern warfare is all domain, and every single domain has areas for us to conduct naval operations in to achieve our objectives. The challenge is synchronizing those effects. And so in the integration process, it's not enough to go do something in a domain. I have the world's best submarine force. I have arguably the world's best Air Force. And coming off no question, the best aircraft carrier, the best surface force. I have the best frogmen with our SEALs. I have, ties to cyber and space. But it's not enough in modern warfare for those things to live individually. They have to be integrated in time and space. And to pull that off requires exquisite planning, practice, rehearsal, and integration of those systems so they talk to one another. It takes exquisite command and control and communication systems to pull that off as well. So when I'm speaking to this and the confirmation and where we're going forward is how we build the way I train, the way I organize, the way I actually build kit, but then how I do integrated battle problems, how I do composite and integrated training, how when I'm in the theater I practice this, and how I build the actual concept of operations to leverage that level of integration. And I'm telling you, this is the keys to the kingdom, is this point you're making. Because if you can't integrate the joint force, and the Navy, if you think about it, we're our own joint force, especially when you bring the Marine Corps in. I have to be able to integrate at those levels to bring what is a smaller force, admittedly smaller than the China's capability, but the special sauce is that integrated lethal effect. So that synchronizing and timing and tempo is the special sauce that makes all this work with the overmatch necessary to win, for instance.
What is your services, Navy Marine Corps, doing well on that integration front, and where is there still more room for work?
Well, a lot of this ties to how we practice that I said, and a lot of that lives in our live virtual constructive environment that we've created through our Navy's training environment that we have that is networked globally, that's being integrated into our maritime operations centers, integrated into our ships already, integrated into our high-end tactical aircraft, integrated into our aircraft carriers and fleet command centers. So when you have an ability to simulate high-end warfare at that level, where the adversary forces can be simulated, additional blue forces can be simulated, I can practice in every ship how I actually am going to try to pull this off and get that timing and synchronization down. So a lot of this lives in the ability to do this through the live virtual constructive networks.
Mm-hmm. Final question. You swore in August 25th. When you conclude this tour, how will you evaluate yourself on whether you were successful and achieved the goals that you wanted to achieve for your tenure?
Well, hopefully I leave with that sailors believe that I treated them like world-class athletes and they feel valued, and so do their families. And so to me, that's there's that qualitative check to me is extremely important. But like I said in my confirmation hearing, from a quantitative perspective, is that I am delivering the ships that I've paid for, and I'm actually getting those on time. I'm getting the ordnance that I've paid for, so the contracted demand is on time. I have zero backlog and spares, and my repair lockers are filled. I have zero gaps at sea, and that sailors are trained to the level of mastery they need to dominate in high-end warfare. I track those metrics every day, and that's what I want to be held accountable to.
Admiral, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, sir.